symbol of excellence in sports.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to adfreeshows.com. And now it's time for something totally different. It's a brand new show here, exclusive to Ad Free Shows, absolutely free for everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling? Of course, we couldn't do it without the master of ceremonies himself, the wrestling genius, Mr. Chris Hero. Chris, how are you, man?
Conrad Thompson, I am fantastically well. This is a long time coming, man. I'm excited to get on here and do this with you.
I'm excited too, man.
Yeah, you're feeling good.
We're pumped to be here with you. We've been talking about this for a long time. We're finally making it happen. And gosh, there's so much to cover. I'm sure there's some of our more lapsed fans, old school fans who may not be super familiar with your career, but we're going to talk about the ups, the downs, the ins, the outs. We're going to do a little bit of everything here on the show, right, Chris?
Absolutely. I love pro wrestling. Since I was 9 years old and I'm 41 now, it's been my life, and it's a pleasure to connect with people all around the world and talk about this crazy ass thing called pro wrestling.
Well, and you connect everywhere, not just on Twitter, but on Reddit. You've been very, very active over there, letting people sort of pick your brain. And I want to mention, you are still very active on Twitter. It's at Chris Hero. So throw Chris a follow if you haven't already. Check him out on Reddit. But man, I want to talk about, what's been going on the last year. 2020 was an interesting year for everyone, wrestlers included, but a particularly interesting year for you. And I realized that, if we're going to do the story of Chris Hero, maybe we would start at, well, here's when I started training. But I thought, given what a weird year this has been, maybe it made sense to just talk about last year first. I guess we should mention you started the year last year as more of a player coach in NXT and NXT UK. Who came to you with the idea of being sort of a player coach?
So I made my return to NXT in January of 2017, and Matt Bloom was the head coach. And I was put into Terry Taylor's class. They have these tiers at the Performance Center. You have Shawn Michaels, you have Terry Taylor, you have Norman Smiley, Scotty 2 Hotty, Steve Corino. You have guys like Ace Steel now, Sarah Del Rey, of course. And they just kind of filter everybody through different classes depending on what they want them to work on. So I was in Terry's class right away. I knew Terry from before. I don't believe it was until 2018 that I ended up with my own class. I don't consider myself a player coach. It's kind of funny that comes up a lot because someone said it. I don't know if it was Dave. I don't know if, I did a video for .com. They came to my house and filmed me with a bunch of stuff. And maybe I was mentioned as a player coach there. But when I think player coach, I think of like Pete Rose,
right?
when he was, a manager for the Cincinnati Reds and he was still playing. I would say that I was talent that occasionally coached, and I realize it's semantics. It doesn't really matter, but I did not have a bump in my pay from coaching.
Right.
I didn't have benefits of that a coach would have. So I just considered myself one of the boys that was helpful because of my past as a coach. Bloom. It was, we have a coach from the UK, Johnny Moss, and he had developed some diaphragm issues. I don't know if, I think it started with a hernia and he had a little thing, and he was over in the UK in between trips, and they encouraged him rather not to fly home. So he was, his students were without a coach. So Bloom asked me if I would come in, hop in and, work with some of those guys. And I had previously shadowed Brookside and helped out with some new people at the PC. So Bloom just shifted me in there. I ran a couple classes. We didn't know how long it was going to be, and it ended up, running for a couple months because, John was gone for a while, to the point where I was writing up reports on how the talent were doing it at practice. I had guys like, Stacey Irvin, who was the gymnast that had a very brief run in NXT. I had Big Jordan Omos now, who's there with AJ Styles. I had some amateur guys. I had a guy named Rick Boogs. He was in my class. I had a rugby guy from Australia named Daniel Vito. So I wasn't working with, I was working with not brand new people, but just right above that cusp. So that lasted for a couple months. And then once that class moved on to other classes, I just went back in, was with Terry again.
So you mentioned a minute ago, there was like tiers. That was the word you used, tiers. Is like Terry Taylor the finishing school guy?
So Terry was without a doubt the finishing guy until Sean came through.
Right.
And then Sean had his own class. And basically, to break this down, you would have class back then 5 days a week. This was obviously before weekly TV. They have class 5 days a week, and they would balance back and forth between in-ring and then film sessions. When you're brand new, there's no sense in putting you in there and watching film because you just need to get the mechanics down. But for the more senior guys, it doesn't make sense for them to bang their bodies up in the ring 5 days a week. So they have more film. When Sean eventually became a full-time producer and coach for NXT, his class, I think he brought them in the ring one time. Right. And he had somebody throw on a chin lock, and he was, talking about how what he would like to see out of a chin lock and whatever, and how, a lot of people are just kind of lazy with it. And that lasted for a couple of hours. And then Sean's class never got in the ring again. So it was kind of like, you want to work your way up to get to that last spot. Sean was in charge of getting guys specifically ready for television, guys that Hunter wanted him to rub off on, if that makes sense. But yeah. Terry was very similar, but Terry did have a little in-ring stuff still at the same time.
Talk to me a little bit about the different classes, because I think we could interpret that as an outsider one or two ways. Sean had a group of 7 or 8 guys that he worked with exclusively, or Sean taught an entire group of guys, the entire roster, for lack of a better word, once a week. What does that look like when you say class? Like,
okay,
a dedicated group, or just everyone learns?
They were broken down into groups, and they would try to keep class sizes around 10 or so. I mean, the PC ended up getting so overflown with just a whole bunch of new people, a bunch of people from the independents, that it's just like, now you've got like 15 people in a class. And that's when they start giving people, less days at the PC that they have to be there. They only want people training that need that training. So you would have somebody comes to the PC brand new, no experience. They're going to go with Robbie Brookside. Robbie Brookside is going to teach them some of the very, very basics. And then they will, once they get to a point and they kind of, I don't want to say graduate, because you could end up back with Brookside depending on what their operatives are, but you would graduate to, at that time, a Serena Deeb or a Norman Smiley. Norman Smiley's very much into the technique and the footwork and just basic things like that. He had a lot of great drills with pins and takeovers. Then you have guys like Steve Carino and Scotty Too Hottie, who are very personality centric, where they know how to, it's not just the nuts and bolts that make a technical wrestling match work. It's the personalities and interacting with the crowd and just trying to get the crowd to move up and down as your match goes along. You had Johnny Moss. Johnny Moss was another basics kind of guy. He worked with the newest people. Now he's full-time over at NXT UK. There's schedule obviously is non-existent at the moment because of lockdowns, but they have like Brookside, Johnny Moss. They have a guy named James Mason that runs classes. They're a little bit different over there because 99% of the UK roster came from a pro wrestling background.
Right.
Whereas in the WWE NXT Performance Center, it's 50-50. You have athletes and just people from different fields that hop into pro wrestling. And then you have the talent that comes from the independents. You get to Terry Taylor. Terry Taylor kind of teaches you to get, to try to get the most out of what you're doing. And he and Sean both focus on television wrestling and what they want for the NXT television product. So
you said a minute ago, we were sort of overflown with talent. You had to guess, how many folks do you think were there at its height? Like, at its biggest population, its biggest class?
including the referees, over 100.
Wow.
And I started at FCW in Tampa, February of 2012, and we had about 30. So I got to see that side of developmental where you have, basic, practically 2 classes. And then, I was there when we moved to Orlando and opened up the Performance Center. And then I came back in 2017 and I saw just how things had grown. There were just so many people. And at any given time, say you have 100 talent, right? You may have 6 referees. You may have 15 or 16 people that are yet to debut because they're just waiting for the right moment that they have enough experience. Then you have your guys that came from the independents and they're trying to fine tune them and get them to wrestle the way that they want them to wrestle. Then you have your NXT stars, right? And some of those people are getting ready to move on to the main roster at any given time. Obviously, I haven't been there most of the year, so I don't really know how that has changed, but that's how it was at that time.
So you've been to your fair share of wrestling schools over the years. If you had to guess, how many wrestling schools do you think you had actually been a part of or attended, just from the hip? I know you don't know off the top of your head, but
so I would say that I've easily been to 10 schools, not necessarily for any length of time, but I'll go through it right now. I started at a garage in Middletown, Ohio, before working my way to Les Thatcher's school, the Main Event Wrestling Camp in Cincinnati. Then I did some training camps with Dory Funk Jr. In Ocala, Florida. I spent a week in Peachtree City, Georgia with the Squire, David Taylor. That's where I met Fit Finley, William Regal, etc. From then, I trained with this guy named Jorge Rivera. He wrestled as Skida. He was Ultimo Dragon's luchador maestro. He was the guy that taught Ultimo's students from Japan. And he had a storied career. His mat wrestling and technique are just phenomenal. So not only did I work with him at seminars in the States, before he ended up moving into my house when I was living in Pennsylvania, because he was helping out when I was at Chikara. I also went down to Mexico and I trained with him at the Torreman gym. From there, I trained a bit with Johnny Saint in England. And then other various schools that I had just stopped in at over the years, the UPW school in Los Angeles, the New Japan Dojo in Los Angeles back then with, post Danielson, Samoa Joe around that era. I've been to Scott D'Amore's school up in Canada. I visited Lance Storm Wrestling Academy right before they ended up closing down. Now it's been a year and a half, but the fall of 2019. So I've been to tons of schools, but the ones that I put the most work at were, Les Thatcher's, Dory Funk's, Dave Taylor, Skida, and then the time that I spent in the Pro Wrestling Noah Dojo in Japan.
So listen, you've been everywhere and obviously seen a lot of different styles of training. It sounds like what you just described with NXT maybe has overcomplicated the process a little bit.
Oh, 110%. There's just, once they went live week to week, they started losing focus of what they wanted to do, or what they wanted from the talent rather, because the initial purpose of NXT was to have a television show to get talent ready for the main roster.
Yeah. So
that they would get those reps. Because when I started with FCW, we would do our monthly tapings for FCW on the Sunshine Network. But then they worked out this deal with Full Sail. They ran like a little, a pilot episode right before I started. It's got like a cool Cesaro Seth Rollins match. Cesaro comes out like with this beret. He was one of the things he was working on before he got called up. But then they just, I don't want to say stumbled, but they ended up into this lucrative deal with Full Sail, and they got on Hulu, and then the network came, and now they capitalized on that niche fan as opposed to the casual fan that loves the main WWE superstars. And then they, I think it was it 2015, I think, when NXT really started gaining steam, where they had they got Kenta, they got Finn Balor, they got Kevin Owens. Obviously Sami Zayn was on his way up. Neville was on his way up. Cesaro would come back and do matches here and again. TJ Wilson or Tyson Kidd would come in and do matches. It just really exploded. I think it was Mania weekend in San Jose where they had that massive show that sold out quickly. And I think they were like, oh my God, we got something on our hands. So the success of that muddies the water, I think, at the Performance Center, because when you have people learning how to wrestle, are they trying to learn how to wrestle so that they can be WWE superstars, or that they can wrestle for NXT? Right. Because while people say they are the same, they're absolutely not the same, because they're run by different people that want different things. And I think one of the reasons that the independent wrestlers, the wrestlers that have the background in independent wrestling are so successful is because they are able to adapt to that. When all you know is what you've been taught in the Performance Center, it's really hard to throw someone a curveball and go, you've been doing it this way for 2 years of your 3-year career. Now we need you to do it this way. And then it's difficult for a lot of the guys and girls there to make certain adjustments, because we can banter back and forth about what's good pro wrestling and what's not good pro wrestling. But what it boils down to is what the boss wants. Who's the boss and what does he want? And if he loves it, then you're doing a good job. Right. So they got so many bodies there in the Performance Center. They have so many different classes. That's another thing. When new people come to the Performance Center, one bit of advice that I try to give them is, gosh, when you're so new and you're starting something exciting like this, you when you have your first match or you do whatever, you want to go, hey, what did you think about it? And then you ask them, oh, what did you think about it? Oh, what did you? And now you have like 5 or 6 different opinions from your match. But what happens is over time that gets really confusing and convoluted. And next thing you know, you're trying to have a match because you're trying to figure out what to do, but you've got these 6 opinions that are in your brain that you're like, oh my God, what do I have to do? So when you start, it is of utmost importance to figure out who you're trying to please, what you're trying to do. And then you need to pick, a peer whose opinion you trust. And then, you would have a coach and you would have a head coach. Then you would have Triple H, right? So that's the hierarchy, of that. So when you've got all these different coaches and you're doing things a certain way, then you move to another coach's class. You got to learn quick what he wants or what she wants, because it may be different, right? It's like switching territories. You go to this territory and he's like, no, what the hell are you doing? You idiot, do this. And you're like, well, how am I supposed to know this? It gets really overwhelming for the new talent.
So you said earlier, the boss, and then you gave the hierarchy. It's often been joked about on the main roster that sometimes things are done for an audience of one. And we know that one is Vince McMahon. That one in NXT, it's Triple H.
100%. You also have Shawn, but more often than not, they're on the same page. Hunter may have a vision for something and Shawn may have a slightly different vision for it. And they'll go back and forth, whether it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or, oh no, I definitely want it this way because of this. So there are people in Shawn's class that Shawn will be critiquing them and they'll say, not to make an excuse or not to, but last week at TV, Hunter said he wanted to see this. And then Shawn will go, oh, okay, no problem. Do it that way. That's the way Hunter wants it. Or, let me have a conversation with Hunter at the next production meeting and we'll discuss, but when it comes to TV, there's only so much time to discuss these things. So you have to pick your battles. You can't be arguing about every little detail, because then it just becomes tedious and then nobody wants to deal with you.
This is way off topic, but since we're down the rabbit hole, I can't help but ask. It's often sort of almost understood that eventually Vince is going to give the keys to the kingdom to Hunter and Stephanie. If and when that happens one day, do you see Sean sort of sliding into Hunter's spot? Does he have a passion to run NXT one day, do you think?
I think so. I think he has to have. I mean, he was in Texas just kind of chilling, enjoying his life, doing his own things until, Hunter made a couple overtures, I presume, and he came in, he checked it out, and then was like, you know what? I really want to be a part of this. I like these guys a lot. He loves, Gargano. He loves Ciampa. I'm sure he loves a lot of the guys that are there now, but those were his guys, and he felt like he was really putting his stamp on things. I don't see Sean as a guy that wants to travel to TVs. Obviously, nobody's fucking traveling right now anyway.
Right.
So, but down the road, I see him as a guy that wants to maintain his home base and would stick with NXT. I don't know him personally that well, so, maybe that's different, but that's how I perceive things to be.
Let's talk about your home base for a minute, because once you start filling in for Johnny and you're helping some of the NXT UK guys, you're going back and forth, right, between Florida and the UK?
Yeah. And so the NXT, or not even NXT, the UK tournament, before there was a brand of NXT UK, that tournament happened right when I was starting back with NXT. And I had just come back from 3 years on the independents working with a lot of those guys.
Right.
And it was such a thrill to see all those guys doing so well. As soon as something was announced for NXT UK, I talked to Joe Belcastro, who was the head writer for NXT. I believe he's just left recently, but my entire last tenure there, he was the head guy. I expressed to him, hey, I would love to go over there and wrestle, because I know a ton of those guys. I think I can have great matches with a lot of them. Plus, I have a history with British wrestling, with the people that I've spent time in the ring with, the program that I had with William Regal, my first run in NXT. And I really wanted to have rounds matches. Like, I was like, if you try to explain it to someone, it's going to sound confusing and like, oh, I think it's too many rules. And sometimes pro wrestling has the habit of being too overcomplicated when it should just be kind of bare bones. But I've watched so many rounds matches over the years. I just think you can use that format to get so much more out of what you're doing. You just have to have the time and patience to educate the fans and be consistent in the way that you have it. So that's something we'll discuss on another episode, I'm sure. I was like, listen, I want to go there. I want to wrestle in the UK whenever it happens, whenever the situation arises. Eventually, they brought in the guys from Progress. Progress, the independent company, would be Glenn, John, and Jim. Those three guys started working really closely with NXT and basically taking what they had learned with Progress and trying to put their own Triple H, Shawn Michaels spin on it for these shows. And he was kind of teaching them how to produce a television show for pro wrestling. Those guys have thought highly of me. Were always in communication with me. I think 2018 they needed there was somebody in a tournament that they had that they, there was some sort of a cancellation, or maybe it wasn't even a cancellation. Maybe they just invited me for the tournament. I'm at a loss at the moment, but I went over there and wrestled their strong style tournament while I was under contract for NXT. So I had a great relationship with them. So the first opportunity they had, they were able to slide me in. The Rumble tapings in 2019, they did it. They had a fan access, and they also taped episodes of NXT UK at that access. I came in and I wrestled Walter. So then that was January. So then Mania weekend, I came back and wrestled more UK tapings, and then I started flying over. I would fly over probably for about a week. I would get there a couple days before the tapings. It was up to me if I felt like going to the UK Performance Center. I'd go there and kind of hang out and work with the guys and girls, and then we would have our taping, and then I'd head back home, and then I was still continuing to work the NXT tapings because I hadn't completely severed with NXT. We eventually did an angle on television where I quit. I wanted to make it seem like I was leaving the company to do something, and that's when I popped up in NXT UK. So this would be once a month I was going to the UK and spending a week there.
And you enjoyed that? You had fun there?
Very much. Good rapport with the people on the roster, both from being on shows with them over the years or being in the ring with them. And then I will gush over my love of European wrestling. You're going to hear it tons of times, but to be able to spend more time with William Regal, Robbie Brookside, Johnny Moss, James Mason, who is one of the smoothest wrestlers I've ever been in the ring with, and then one of my personal heroes, Johnny Saint, to get to spend more time with them and just learn a little bit more and just build those relationships. It was a really awesome opportunity for me to kind of come over there and just have my pick of what to do. I could pitch who I wanted to work with. Not that it always came true, but I had that rapport with the NXT UK office that I could do that.
What was your go-to Nando's order?
Oh man. Lemon herb, as they say. It's herb, but yeah. Lemon herb. Going to make a bold Nando's claim here. I first had Nando's in Australia, probably 2008, and I loved it. It was incredible. And the Nando's that I've had since then has not been as incredible. It's still very good. I like the corn. The corn's another good one.
Yeah, it is.
But I just yearn for the days of that Australian Nando's that I had 12 years ago. That was exceptional. Nando's
Dragon.
Yeah, you'd hop on the tour bus at the end of the tapings to go back to the hotel, and they'd have about 20 chicken pittas. So I had plenty of Nando's in my time in the UK.
It's like the go-to for wrestling over there, is it not?
It is. There's also
you're on the.
I was just going to say there's also a great restaurant called Wagamama's. Very, very highly recommended if you're ever in the UK.
You're on the NXT Takeover UK show before the show was on the WWE Network, and you're losing to Dave Mastiff for TV. Do you think the presentation of NXT's Takeover in the US with the bigger buildings and crowd sort of dwarfed the UK version and made the product feel, I don't know, less than? Because it doesn't feel like it ever really caught fire the way the American takeovers did.
So, I mean, that's a very difficult. Those are big shoes to fill. Because the U.S. takeovers have just been incredible and selling out these venues and just rabid crowds for 3+ hours. I think they did the right thing with NXT UK, booking smaller venues. And just having the UK crowds are unlike any others. They have their soccer chants or their football chants.
Yep.
And they have a certain kind of engagement. Sometimes I think it overpowers the match if you don't have the right talent in the ring to kind of conduct that. But there's nothing like it. I don't think you can look. They had 3 takeovers in the UK. I don't think you can look at any of those shows and not come away being impressed by it. Obviously, if you're comparing one to the other, obviously the American crowds were massive. But I think in pro wrestling, you often worry about having to top something, right? You're in the back. The match right before you is just killing it. They're just destroying it, right? So your impulse is, oh my God, I gotta go out there. I gotta, really tear it up. It's like, sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can bring it and top it. But if you can't, you have to do something different. And I think that was good about NXT UK. They booked different type of venues. They had different crowds. I thought I don't think they ever came off like a copy. I think it was a different product.
Well, the analogy you made about the crowd, where the crowd could sort of almost overshadow what's happening in the ring. Does that sound a little bit like ECW at times to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Where the crowd just sort of takes over? Yeah.
Yeah. And God, even to a much lesser extent, the old CZW shows I would do in the ECW arena, where they just, I'm going to get this out of the way because this is a philosophy that I believe in wrestling. I think there is no such thing as a bad crowd, just bad wrestlers. The bad crowd is the one that doesn't buy a ticket, right? They're the ones that stay home, right?
Yeah.
That being said, there are some awfully difficult crowds.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to know that and to plan accordingly. If you are brand new and you're going out there and there are a bunch of vultures, right? You need to, if you have something crazy you're going to do, you have to nail it, because even the slightest misstep and they will eat you for lunch.
Yeah.
With UK, I think maybe some of it has to do with alcohol as well.
There you go.
But I think they just get so wrapped up in the chants that they're doing that they're paying more attention to the chants than they are the match. And it's okay to do the chants, to go back and forth with the wrestlers. But as a pro wrestler, you have to command attention. You have to find a way to, hey guys, you're going to want to watch what I'm doing because I am beating the shit out of this guy, right? And then sometimes you just chalk it up to a loss. Sometimes you can't get them back. Sometimes you can't get them the way you want them. But that's the beautiful thing about crowds, right? In the history of pro wrestling, the hundreds of thousands of wrestling shows that have happened over the years, there's never been the same crowd twice. It's always different. There's always different energy. There's different atmosphere. There's different moods amongst the people in the audience. You don't know what happened to them that day. You don't know if they're in a fighting mood or if they just want to laugh. But that's what's cool about wrestling, man. We can take, we try to conjure up that energy from them and then kind of conduct it in the direction that we want it to go.
The chants and the interaction with the crowd.
Yeah.
It almost feels a little bit like at times it's like a live viewing of Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah. I have
this is the part where I yell.
Yeah. Or are you familiar with the movie The Room?
Mm-hmm.
Tommy Wiseau. This is where we throw spoons at the screen.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Very much so.
Walter, you mentioned him a minute ago. He was sort of the top guy of the NXT UK promotion, if you will. Mm-hmm. And he's got quite a fan base online. You mentioned that you worked him. What's your opinion on Walter?
He's one of a kind. He looks different. He's big as hell. He's very agile as well. He ticks all the boxes. He's very different. I think he was definitely the right guy for them to put in that spot. And he's somebody that you put him out in front of a crowd that's never seen him before. They may have a preconceived notion of what he is or what he's going to bring to the table. But if he's in there with the right opponent, by the end of that match, you're going to have a complete image burned into your brain of who Walter is and the kind of things that he does. I first met Walter, I'm going to guess 2008. He's from Austria. I met him working for WXW in Germany, a company that I had been with since practically their beginning. I think I was on maybe their fourth show, but they built themselves up to be the preeminent promotion in Germany. But they really spent a lot of time developing him. He spent some time in the Big Japan dojo. This is kind of funny. You can look up on Google these different images of him. It's kind of like an anime character called Gacha Ping. So poor Walter went to Japan. He wants to be like Kobashi and Stan Hansen. And they're like, oh, maybe this anime character. And then he's got to dye his hair green and wear this green singlet and stuff. But it's a testament to his love for the business that he's like, you know what, I'm in Japan, I'll do whatever they want. And he just, over the years, it's funny, I've had a number of matches with him, but if you stack them up all against each other, you can just see the leaps and bounds of progress each time I've been in the ring with him. I wrestled him. WXW has their yearly tournament called the 16 Carat, and that's where they bring in talent from all over the world, and they just really have these barn burner matches. I wrestled him in the finals one year, and he was good then, but you can just look back on him. You know, you can look back on that now, knowing what he became, and it's what a progression. He's just a real stud.
Yeah, go out of your way to see some of his stuff if you're not familiar. He's a one-of-a-kind talent for sure. Let's talk about the NXT versus NXT UK Worlds Collide show. I think that happened Rumble weekend last year. I don't believe you were on that show. What did you think of the show, and why weren't you featured there?
So the previous year at Access, they had tinkered with this idea of doing Worlds Collide, where you have people from NXT and the UK, and you have 205 Live, and maybe SmackDown Raw, whatever, and they just taped these matches to kind of see how they would go. And the following year, they decided, hey, let's have this as a big show. I had been told to mention it in promos and whatever, to the point where I thought, like, am I going to be on this show? Like, nobody's told me I'm on this show. Why do they have me mentioning it in these promos? So I did not do the show. I would like to have had the opportunity, because I did not get to have a takeover match as a full-on heel. And I had turned heel against, that's a lie. I did have one against Riddle, freshly turned. I wrestled Riddle on 2 takeovers. The one was the 6-second match, and the following one, we had a much longer match. I didn't get to have a takeover match as the Wrestling Genius character that I had been working on in the UK. And I thought that in a big setting like that I could get some really good heat and not just be a blow away takeover match that's doing any and everything just physically possible. So I would have liked to have had the opportunity to see how I could do in that environment. I thought the show was good. They had a lot of people that had wrestled each other prior, so there was a little bit of chemistry, and I thought the crowd was great for being introduced to a lot of these new talents. I mean, you obviously have the diehard fans that are familiar, but NXT UK, I don't know the numbers, but I know the discourse online, and you watch an NXT show and you look at Twitter and you kind of see all the people watching, but then you watch NXT UK and it was significantly less, the discussion. Or if somebody had like a really banger of a match on NXT UK, they'd talk about it for a couple days and then it would just kind of fade to the back. So knowing that, I thought they did an excellent job of establishing a bunch of people and having some really good matches.
So let's talk about Rumble weekend. Last year there were lots of NXT talents in the Rumble. Of course, on the guys' side, we saw Matt Riddle and Keith Lee, but man, the women were just loaded. I mean, Bianca, Mercedes, Candice, Mia, Dakota, Chelsea, Tony, on and on and on. There was a lot of NXT talent featured in the Rumble. Unfortunately, you're not a part of that. Where are you feeling about, your lot in life, I guess, in January of 2020?
So my hope was that I could build something strong in NXT UK and help draw some more eyes to that product, people that were familiar with my work from the States, but not familiar with that brand. I was hoping to draw a little bit of interest that way. And then I was really putting in a lot of work, mentally, at least, with this Wrestling Genius character.
Right.
So my thought was, I am a guy from the States that loves British wrestling. But these guys, I idolized guys like Finley, Regal, and Johnny Saint, whereas these guys in the NXT UK, they idolize Shawn Michaels, they idolize Bret Hart, they idolize Rey Mysterio. So to me, I'm like, you're not being true to your brand. Like, that's not NXT UK. That's you do a super kick because of Shawn Michaels, not because of Chris Adams, right? That was so that was the kind of mentality that I'd kind of dialed in there. And I'm like, listen, I'm going to be the guy from the US that comes to your town and kicks your ass doing your own wrestling. So I really wanted to foster that up. And I thought, I was hoping like, okay, I can work my way up there and use that somehow as a springboard to come back to regular NXT. And as a heel, as a new fully formed heel that does not have to wrestle in the same way that a lot of the people in NXT had to. That was my hope. I never had any delusions of I could go up to the main roster at any time. Like I kind of realized once I started back and I saw how I was being used in maybe those first 6 months that I came back, I kind of figured what was happening. So I felt like, well, let me just make the most out of this. Let me try to fine tune my wrestling so that I get as good as possible, learn as much as possible, enjoy the hell out of these shows that I'm on. Whatever minutes I'm given for television, I want to maximize that and get the most out of it. So that's my mental going into this. I'm thinking I'm going to use NXT UK and not only bump up their profile, but put myself in a situation where I can hop back to NXT UK and be a player as opposed to the gatekeeper, as a lot of people would say. I thought the Rumble was good. No matter what happens with the product, they always figure out, they get all these wonderful wrestling minds in a room together and they come up with some great stuff for the Rumble. Yep. And it's always good to see who gets these different spots, what do they come up with for this? The girls had a ton of, that was, I believe, Shayna's main roster debut, if I'm not mistaken. And, she is somebody that I thought was going to hop right in there and shake things up because she was so different than all those other girls on the main roster. And I really thought that she could hold her own in that position. But just to circle back, I didn't feel that, you see the tweets like, oh, maybe Cassius is going to be in the Royal Rumble. I did not think that I would be in the Royal Rumble. I just did not feel that I was in any position to go from what I was doing at that time to being called up.
Let's talk a little bit about what the NXT travel schedule was like here. You mentioned earlier that you'd go over to the UK, for a week at a time or whatever. But are you making the coconut loop or whatever they called it? Are you still doing NXT house shows as well?
The coconut loop. Those would be the Largos, the Palatkas, the Citrus Springs, Lakeland, Daytona, et cetera, et cetera. You get the drift. They would typically have those shows Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They would also have NXT travel shows that would go all over the country. That would also, into Canada as well. Those shows were so fun because you're going to like Nashville, Louisville, Kentucky, but you're not there all the time. You're coming there once, maybe twice a year. And they would book these, typically they would book concert venues and, some of the places would be a little too massive, but some of these venues were just awesome. Like the Agora Theater in Cleveland. You just get these rabid NXT fans, and the shows themselves are less critiqued by the producers. There's less pressure. You don't have to stick strictly to your time cues because it's not television. So you can just kind of relax and spread your wings a bit and just really enjoy the energy from these crowds. Whereas I was in a number of wonderful matches on the Coconut shows and some really hot crowds, particularly Jacksonville. Jacksonville was always hot for some reason. But it's a bit of oversaturation because you're wrestling in Fort Pierce once a month, and there is no show-to-show continuity for the most part. Eventually, Steve Corino got a hold of the Coconut shows and was trying his best to try to make the most out of what was possible. Coconut shows are bottom rung, so they don't get any specific attention because they're just not the priority. Priority's television, right? Then there's Travel Loop. Then there's, whatever else is going on. Then it's like, okay, well, who do I have to choose from to put on this show? And it's like a lot of the brand new people, maybe you get a couple TV people, right? So a lot of these, it was peculiar. I would notice on some of these shows, of course, we have our diehard fans, so I'm not speaking of those, but in some of these towns throughout Florida, the ring announcer would be out there, all right, everybody, who watched NXT last week? And I'm like, I don't think these people follow the product. I think they're just coming to a live show. So not only are they not familiar with the brand new people, they're not super familiar with some of the television people from NXT, right? So that's the dichotomy between those two types of shows. Now, again, there's exceptions everywhere. There are some travel shows where I came out and I'm like, I don't think anybody here knows who I am. And then there were some Coconut shows where I'd go out and I'd feel like Hulk Hogan, right? But that's just kind of what you're dealing with. You have your Thursday, Friday, Saturday in Florida, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday on the road. And they kind of pick and choose who goes where. The newer people that are kind of working their way up, that maybe they're not even on NXT TV yet, they'll pick one or two of them to go on the travel shows so that they get that experience. They get the experience not just of the match, but of the traveling as a group, flying, just building that camaraderie with each other. It's very important to do that. But the travel shows were just so easy. Some of the easiest shows I've ever done, because your call time is 5, but you get on the bus, right? You fly to the town, you get on the bus takes you to the hotel, they got food for you. Then you got like 3 or 4 hours to kill to do whatever you want. Then you're back to the venue, you got a show at 7:30, you go out, you do whatever you want for the most part, in front of a hot, awesome crowd. And then you have no responsibilities. All you have to do is get on the bus, right? Whereas on the Coconut shows, you have a 4:00 call time, so you're getting there around 3:30. So some of these shows are, some of them are an hour away, but some of them are 2.5, 3 hours away. So you leave at noon to get there. You set up the ring. You kind of have like your group meeting to kind of go over stuff. And then it's like, okay, then the show finishes. You got to wait. Everybody clears out. You tear down the ring. You put it back in the truck. You get on the road. You get home at 2 a.m. So they're both very different. So it depends. Sometimes you get put on the shows last minute. You are expecting to have the weekend off, and you're like, on our phones, we would have an application called the TR app, right, which is for talent relations. So you would get a buzz whenever something got put into your account. So if you're needed in Largo on Friday, you get a buzz. Or if you made the list for the travel loop, you get a thing, and there's your itinerary of what hotel you're staying at, the number, the et cetera, the venue, the call time, the ticket information. But with the Coconut shows, you're just like, all right, you're booked for Immokalee, Florida, or West Haven, or whatever, Winter Haven rather. Just both. Isn't that kind of funny how different both of those are?
Yeah, it's fascinating, just the whole dynamic about the way NXT has changed. I mean, even around that time, I think they started to pull back on live events, right?
Yeah, it would. So one, we have hurricanes down here.
Right.
So we run a lot of armories, and when there's any type of a threat of a hurricane, the armories have to be ready to deploy whatever. So we had a number of shows canceled over the years because of that. But it's also how well the shows are doing pre-sale wise. And like I said, they weren't able to have show to show continuity. It's not like we grew up, right? We're watching Jim Duggan versus Ted DiBiase, and then it's intermission and they go, all right, tickets are on sale at the box office next month. We've got Demolition versus the Legion of Doom. And then everybody runs over there. Oh, well, I need to buy my tickets, right? They don't know who's going to be there tomorrow, let alone who's going to be there next month.
Right.
So you have to just enjoy going to live events, right? You have to realize that if you go to see Johnny Gargano, there's a chance he might not be there, right? Just because of whatever his schedule is that week, or they weren't. There needs to be a better way for them to organize those shows. They may never have them again. Who knows, right? Who knows with those shows? But it just was a difficult situation. When you're booking these shows, you want to have the best matches possible, but you also want to have an audience there to kind of check everything out and hopefully build to, these guys and girls get experience and build a connection with the crowd. And it's kind of hard with how inconsistent things can be because of how much talent there are. And it's just difficult, man. NXT is trying to do like 5 things. And you spread yourself too thin, things slip between the cracks and they just don't get dealt with as easily as they should be, or as handily as they should be.
Yeah, I was going to say, it almost feels like they're trying to be a jack of all trades. I mean, they've got, I don't know, maybe a bit of an identity crisis, but that, I guess, lent itself to some opportunity from you, because you wound up doing some announcing for NXT UK along with Tom Phillips and Aiden English for TV. How does that come about?
Someone that was very nice to me throughout both of my tenures with WWE was Michael Cole. I had done a little bit of color commentary my last run, and I think that was connected to my program with William Regal. And in trying to practice for that and get my reps in and figure out what to do, I spent a lot of time talking with Michael Cole and asking his opinion and just kind of getting his idea. And he was always very helpful, very complimentary. And that stuck with me. Whenever I would see him, I would talk with him about various things, and just, he would always encourage me to keep doing that. So at the Performance Center, they have everything, right? So they have these back rooms where you can just do voiceovers, you can do commentary, and you can record it and upload it to their system, this VBrick system they have. And then you could, if I was doing this, I could send it to like Morrow or to Tom Phillips or Corey Graves, or you could send it to them and go, hey, listen to this, let me know what you think. And they can give you feedback, right? So that's the kind of system that they have in place. Whenever they have someone they're trying out for commentary, like maybe like when Beth Phoenix, before she started doing commentary, she would go in there and record stuff, and they would just kind of be like, all right, maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something I always had the interest of doing. I felt when I was a babyface in NXT that I would not have been as good on commentary. I think it's just so much easier to kind of be smarmy and be, just kind of a prick, right? It's just easier. So once I had turned heel, and then that kind of coincided with me heading over to UK, I didn't think of this right away because I wanted to nail my stuff and get it down. I just thought, wow, what a good opportunity for me to get better at commentating. And then also that, any kind of an angle can start from commentary. I mean, we saw that so many times growing up. There's a million ways to do it. I just thought, wow, there's a good way for me to continue having a presence on the show, even if I don't happen to have a match that week. Because there'd be some trips where I would go over there, we'd have 2 days of taping, 6 weeks, and I'd just have one match. So in my head, I'm like, well, that's one match. I'll probably have some kind of a promo or a backstage segment. That's in 6 weeks. I'm only getting my face on there 2 or 3 times. I would like to have more opportunity to establish that connection and lay that foundation for the character that I was doing. So I came to Joe Balcastro and said, hey man, I'd love to do some UK commentary. I think I know a lot of the stuff. I just need to practice it because it is difficult. It is so hard to do commentary. I'm not talking about the commentary I used to do at PWG where Excalibur and I are sitting there with our headphones. We're just talking. We're kind of scrolling through our phone, looking stuff up and, just having fun. Here, it's like, okay, you have to make sure your mic is set. We have to do this. You have these 8 bullet points to get across. You have to know when to speak, when not to speak. And I tripped out. I was doing commentary for NXT, like I said, during the William Regal angle. This was probably 2012, I'm going to guess. And I'm so wooden, and I'm like, okay, I'm sweating. I'm trying to figure out what to say. And Jim Ross beeps in from the back. He's like, I did Enziguri, but make sure you mention Antonio Inoki. So I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Jim Ross brought up Antonio Inoki. But now the match is going on in front of me, and I'm like trying to find my window to get it in. And then it's like, Antonio Inoki, like 30 seconds later. People don't understand how difficult it is to do commentary. So that's something I wanted to get better at. Joe gave me the opportunity. He thought, oh man, let's do it. So I did some dark matches. Never did anything on TV, but it was something I was, again, hoping to do more in the future.
Well, something else you were hoping to do around this same time is your Wrestling Genius, that whole concept. And I know that you talked about how maybe you wanted to try to evolve that through the announcing. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you were hoping to go with the whole Wrestling Genius thing?
So it was all my idea. It's not that they didn't have ideas for me. I just had I debuted on NXT UK in one of their tapings. I'm not talking about the Access tapings. I wrestled, one match. I had a debut match. I won. Then the next day I had this promo segment where I came out and cut this promo and whatever. And then I had a match, and then I lost the match. And then I was kind of like, wow. I remember talking to him before and just asking, okay, well, what's the plan for me? What would you like to do? And then I saw like, oh, I think I'm just kind of like a utility guy. Right.
Yeah.
So how can I take this and make the most out of it? So I just started, whenever I would have an opportunity, I'd start doing the Wrestling Genius stuff. I got the Andy Kaufman shirt made that said, like instead of Women's Wrestling Champion of the World, said a Wrestling Genius, Cassius Ohno. That was just something I did on my own, and hoping, you throw a bunch of stuff up against the wall and hope something sticks, right? The content of my promos were things I was coming up with on my own and then once I gave them some of that substance, they would kind of come back to me with certain ideas like, oh, let's maybe this, maybe that, blah, 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 blah. I will eventually get to answering this. I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head around my thought process at the time. Something I think in wrestling that happens too often is when the heel cuts off the babyface to go into the heat of a match, right? Unless you have two very strongly secure characters that it's The Undertaker against Rey Mysterio, or right. You have John Cena against Randy Orton. People know these people, then you can do whatever you want, right? You don't have to follow the rules as strictly.
Right.
But what happens a lot is guys that aren't necessarily as connected or as over a babyface getting cut off by the heel would do something dumb, right? You just turn your back on him, you do whatever, you get attacked, right? That is when you're calling a match, it's easy to just go, oh yeah, I'll look over and I'll get attacked and that's it, right? The kid in the crowd, the 6-year-old in the crowd that sees that is confused by it. Maybe the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old is like, what, why do you do that? Why, whatever, right? The person in the crowd that's a little intelligent goes, well, he's a dumbass, right? When people think you're a dumbass, it's really hard for them to sympathize with you.
Yeah.
And you build your heat off of drawing sympathy from the crowd.
Right.
So when I had my matches as the wrestling genius, I always, whenever I cut them off to go into a segment or to go into a finish, I always wanted it to be something underhanded that, I don't want to say buries the baby face, but something that where someone can go, oh, well, if he wouldn't have done this, he wouldn't have got cut off. It's me sliding a knee pad down. It's me throwing my elbow pad so that the ref turns his head. It's me waiting till he comes through the ropes and doing something. It's little things like that that give him, I'm being crafty, but I'm doing it in a somewhat illegal way. So I tried to do that with all of my matches. Whenever I won a match, whenever I had a cutoff, I always tried to do something that was different, that was unique to me. And that was my hope. My hope was I wanted to be different, right? Like I said earlier, when you can't top something, you just have to take a left turn, right? You have to take a right turn, whatever. You just can't. And I saw, man, one of the last NXT takeovers I saw, and man, I loved some of those takeovers, but the last one that I watched was just too much. And sometimes I'll see something and I'll go, oh my God, that was too much. But then you look at the crowd and they're standing on their chairs and they're going crazy. That's right. When I have to go, well, I thought it was too much, but it worked. Right. But there were points during that show when the fans were clearly tired. And I just felt like, oh man, I felt bad for them because they all just want to go out and kill it, right? They all just want to go out there and have the best match. But it's like, it's not always possible to have the best match on every single show when you have guys that are all used to having the best match on every single show. So you have to do different things. I was hoping to cultivate this wrestling genius thing. And gosh, I wanted to come back with some sort of a crazy robe, entrance gear, some sort of a crown type thing where I would be not just the corny wrestling genius with the Andy Kaufman shirt saying smart ass things here and there, something that you could see as a main eventer, somebody that could come in, be cold, be calculated, be crafty. And then when it comes time, he can bump his ass off and sell, and, not in a comedic way, but in I'm genuinely getting my ass kicked. So that was, I was trying to come up with stuff for that, whether it was the first of last year, I had submitted some designs for some tights that I wanted to get, and just to kind of turn things and go in a little bit of a different direction.
Let's talk about where we are in January. You only wrestle in front of a crowd in that month a handful of times. Are you growing frustrated with your lack of in-ring? I mean, you've been pretty active over the course of your career, and now here you are, you're signed, and you've got the security of being with WWE, which is nice, I guess. And you're trying some new things with some announcing and some coaching, but you're not really getting the ring time maybe that you were hoping for. Are you frustrated with that? Or are you sort of comfortable with, it's not my time right now and I'm trying some new things? Or where's your head at, when you're not getting as much ring time?
I was appreciative to have the schedule that I did. I got to a point where I only had to come to the Performance Center if I wanted to. So there were definitely some days where it was like, I don't think I'm going to go in today. But then there were some other days where I'd come in and roll around in the ring for a couple hours, or I'd come in and sit in one of Carino's history classes, or they'd have a PC Live, which is a live event for the young wrestlers at the Performance Center. So the audience are just fellow wrestlers, right? But it's a chance for them to get a rep in, and not just a practice match, but produced. And, I would go in, I would check those out every now and again. So I had a really easy schedule when it came to that. I liked doing the UK trips. I thought those were a lot of fun. I liked doing travel shows. I was able to not really pick and choose what Florida shows I did, but I was able to pitch ideas. Like, for instance, my last show on a coconut was myself and Shane Thorne myself and Ridge Holland, rather, against Shane Thorne and Cal Bloom, former tight end for UCF, the son of Wayne the Train Bloom. And Ridge Holland is a guy, he's on the injury table right now. Unfortunately, he had a leg injury on an NXT show. He's a guy I liked a whole lot. He looks like $1 million. He has a great work ethic and a great love for wrestling. Actually, he played rugby. When he got let go out of his rugby contract, he was on the phone to Marty Jones to train with him, and Marty put him in touch with Regal, and then he had maybe 50, 60 matches on the independents, and he got signed. So this is a guy very brand new. He was a guy that I had spent a good amount of time with, training and such. And I pitched for him to be my bodyguard before they were using him on NXT. I thought, let me get this, big guy to kind of have a heavy, kind of build a little bit more around me. They had other plans for him, so they ended up doing that. However, I pitched to team with him on some of these Florida shows and give us 20 minutes. That's the problem with some of these coconut shows. You go out there and you're wrestling 6 or 8 minutes, and then it's like you have a live crowd. Like you can only learn so much in a building without people. You can learn so much more by being in a building with an audience. And I think when you've got 6 minutes for a match, you don't get to open yourself up and kind of take all that in. Right. So I wanted to have longer matches on these coconut shows. I pitched a team with Ridge Holland, and then we had, probably a 20-minute match. Was not the greatest match, unfortunately. But I enjoyed being able to make suggestions and at that time. So that is something. I had some tag partners on these coconut shows over the years. I teamed a little bit with Fabian Eichner, who's in Imperium. I teamed a little bit with Dijak. So they try out these things on these coconut shows, and you just try to get something going. So there are, different things that are able to happen because they see something in West Palm Beach that went really well.
So when we're talking about your matches here, I mean, I think that match you mentioned with Bloom and Thorne and all that, and Ridge Holland, that's like next to last besides the Battle Royal for you in NXT?
Yeah. My last two were a singles with Kenny Williams, and then I had that Battle Royal. That was UK tapings. I was actually supposed to have a dark match with Finn Balor that second day of the tapings, but I had a bit of a sore throat. I wasn't overly sick, but I was feeling slightly under the weather. And this was when all the virus stuff was going on.
Yep.
And I didn't think I had the virus, but I just was like, oh man, I'm just more conscious of my health. So I ended up not having the dark match. I ended up just having the Battle Royal. Then when we fly home from that trip, that's when we start seeing people in airports with like masks and stuff. And then we're like, oh man, should I have a mask? Are these people taking it too seriously? Or am I, how many masks do I need to get? Where do I get them?
To give everyone context, what we're talking about, your tag match we were referencing a minute ago is the last day of February. And then at the end of the first week of March, that's when you're working back to back in the UK, once against Kenny Williams and then in the Battle Royal.
Yeah.
So when you come home from that trip, by mid-March, the world is different. I mean, something's happening.
Yeah. And when the rumblings first started coming up over the virus, sometime in February, I believe I went into the medical room at the Performance Center, and I just was like, because over the years you just hear of these certain viruses and such, and then sometimes they sound terrible, sometimes they don't sound that bad. You just try to gauge how serious they are. And in our lives, we've had some that were somewhat serious, but clearly nothing to the magnitude of this, right? So I was asking around in the medical center, our trusted medical professionals, and I got a oh, it's just the flu.
Right.
So I'm like, well, I don't know. They're awful confident. Then I go on this UK trip, I come back, and then that's when people are really starting to take it more seriously. And then I think after I had been home a couple days, I get a call from the doctor. Hey, you just traveled internationally. You got to quarantine for 10 days or something like that. And then that's when I was like, oh my God, I just got to stay home. Can't leave the house. I'm like, well, that's, really not a problem for me. But it I got enough stuff here to entertain myself for years, but just the uncertainty was really, worrisome.
We, man, it's a weird time to go back and think about March now. Yeah. As we said, you had your last couple of matches on March 6th and 7th. They would air on March 19th and April 2nd. When you come home, COVID's the thing. What are you doing in that time? Are you still communicating with some of your students? I mean, classes are shut down at that point. What's life look like, in late March and early April?
There were some of the NXT talent that I'd keep contact with regardless. So obviously just chatting with each other, trying to figure out how serious this is, what's going to happen. But I just watched a lot of wrestling. I watched a lot of movies. I watched a lot of TV shows. I think Tiger King was a big thing, right? When all this happened.
Yeah.
God, Rachel and I must have watched 10 different series, start to finish. I've got all these wrestling DVDs. I've got these yearbooks that are January 1st, 1990 to December 31st, 1990. And it's 30 discs and it's all promotion. So let's just see what happened in the year 1990. And then next thing you know, we're on disc like 22. We're like, oh my God, we've just watched, 60 hours of wrestling in the last 2 weeks. You just try to distract from the real stuff going on to not go crazy, not go completely crazy. We're already a little crazy, but
let's talk about some other things that were happening at the time. And I know you and I have a big plan at some point to talk about a mutual friend of ours, someone you were much closer with than I, but Tracy Smothers' health starts to fail here. And it becomes apparent that, man, he's in a big fight for his life here. And I know we're going to do a whole show on that, but around the same time that coronavirus is becoming a part of our lives, you hear that one of your old mentors is in a bad way.
Yeah, late 2019 is when it came out that Tracy was dealing with cancer, and I did not message him immediately because it just is like, oh my gosh, it's a heavy thing to process. My father actually passed away from lymphoma, so it took me a little bit of time to touch base with Tracy, but I had seen there was a GoFundMe. And I clicked on it, and maybe $120 were given already. I didn't know the guy that had started it. I reached out to Tracy and I said, hey, I want to give something, but I don't know if this is official. And he told me that it was. So I thought, okay. And then over the next couple of days, I did some thinking, and I thought, well, I want to be helpful. I don't know what I can do, but I started a GoFundMe for the first time in my life. I had never done anything like that. I didn't really know how to do it. I started a GoFundMe with his permission. And then at the same time, I had some designer friends of mine whip up this crazy Tracy Smothers Fighting a Bear t-shirt. And I decided to launch them at the same time. Like, just, hey, Tracy needs our help. He's having some difficulties with some bills. Let's do something to get his mind off of this. He's a fighter. So while I was sad to see him weak and going through this, he's a fighter. I never doubted for a moment that he was going to kick out. So I was able to raise, over $15,000 through the GoFundMe, some very big donations from some big people in pro wrestling. I was able to sell a shitload of t-shirts that looked awesome. I was able to get him the designs as well so that he could sell them on his own. And then throughout this process, I had just reconnected with him, and we would have these phone calls and chit chat, and man, he was a true mentor to me. He was a true friend, and man, he just always looked after me. I met him when I was 19 years old, and he never forgot it. I worked with him, a year and a half later for IWA Mid-South. He started bringing me to the ring with him. And just over the years, he was always very supportive of me, and just a one of a kind, awesome guy. And he just set the standard for the type of wrestling veteran that I want to be. I want to be the guy that gives people the benefit of the doubt. I want to be the positive, the constructive criticism, the one that is not too cool to be impressed by this kid's new move, or these guys went out there and tore it down. Like, to give them that appreciation from somebody that's been around. I just strive to be that, and he set such a good example for me, not just me, for hundreds of others over the years. And it very sad, and like you said, we'll cover it at length at another time, but I'm just so grateful to have been able to reconnect with him. And I've got some voicemails from him, I've got some text messages, some Facebook messages, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to kind of rekindle that and become closer with him.
We lost another major name in wrestling last year. April 16th, Howard Finkel passed away. What were your memories or interactions with Fink? I'm sure you met him over the years.
Yeah, when you close your eyes and you think pro wrestling ring announcer,
yeah,
I mean, it's Finkel, right? He just is so iconic, and so, he announced so many major, incredible moments. That's just a part of my childhood. And the times that I met him, he could not have been any sweeter, and just what a really friendly person that loved the business. I wish I could have known him more. I wish I could have spent more time around him, but I saw him at some NXT shows and some WWE things over the years. I got to see him briefly at WrestleMania the year prior. He just, what a legend, what a great guy. He's someone that I would love to have seen a comprehensive autobiography or a biography of all the things he had done over the years, and just what a career, for someone to have loved wrestling that much and to be able to have done so much in wrestling, just incredible.
Let's talk about WrestleMania last year. They're in the middle of the pandemic, or maybe not the middle. They're at the very beginning. Nobody knows exactly what to do. And it felt like a last minute call. I understand there was probably a lot of factors involved. That's probably a show for another day, but either way, it's no longer going to be in Tampa, no longer going to be a stadium show. There won't be fans there. Now it's going to happen at the Performance Center in front of no crowd. As a wrestler, no crowd, and what's essentially a warehouse, and it's the biggest show of the year. What did you think of that, watching that one?
Well, I'll have you know, Conrad, that I have wrestled in several warehouses in front of no crowd.
But you got to imagine if it's a guy like Drew McIntyre.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation the other day where there is a style of wrestler that is very conducive to that empty arena atmosphere. You've got someone like a Terry Funk that is just so boisterous and loud and over the top, and it makes it more enjoyable because you can understand everything he's saying, and he just has all this empty space to work with. He's a genius, Terry Funk. Then you have somebody like a Tim Thatcher or a Walter, whose emphasis is on the technique and the moves and the holds and how they're twisting them. Those types of wrestlers, can knock it out of the park every time, because that's what they're, trained for, right? When you rely more on direct interaction with the crowd, it's tough as hell. There's no crowd, right? Come on.
Yeah.
And you're like crickets. So you have to adapt to the style. You have to change your style. You just have to figure it out. And it's hard. I watched everything, and there was this morbid curiosity of like, oh my God, can you imagine Mania that's usually in front of 80,000 people, in front of 0 people?
Right.
You just hear every little footstep, every little creak, every, whatever. It was so difficult. And my heart went out to everybody that had to work through that. And, we saw some really great performances, which is, awesome. And some people that had some great WrestleMania moments that did not necessarily feel like WrestleMania moments, through no fault of their own. It's tough. It's tough. You have to have a real strong connection with the audience at home, and they really have to care about what you're doing for that to be a home run every single time.
Let's talk about something you're doing. I think this happens during Corona. You start your own subreddit /Wrestling Genius. Is that around the same time?
It was. I got the name just to see if it was possible. I saw it one day, like create your own subreddit. So I just clicked on it and I was like, oh, let me just try this Wrestling Genius. And then it was available. So I took it, and then I didn't do anything with it for a little while. But once the stuff came up with Tracy Smothers GoFundMe, I decided, wow, what a good way to kind of draw some attention and onto a different platform. If you look through my Twitter over the last couple of years, there were maybe 4 or 5 times that I would do these Q&A sessions where it would be #AskWrestlingGenius. And man, I would get some of these off the wall questions and just wrestling nerd stuff that I really like to sink my teeth into. And it's a challenge to me to try to be able to answer anything anybody throws at me. But then when they throw something at me that I am not 100% sure about, then I can take a couple minutes, look around, talk to some friends. And then now I've been educated on something that I didn't know prior.
Right.
So I just got so many great questions over the years from this Ask Wrestling Genius, where it's something simple like, what's the difference between a clothesline and a lariat? Or who is the first person to do the figure 4 leg lock? Or what's the ranking of the 4 pillars of All Japan Pro Wrestling? Like, who created the short arm scissor? Those type of questions. I thought, wow, let me just see if there's an audience for this, because every time I do these, I'm getting hundreds of questions. Let me put them all in a subreddit so that I'm not getting the same questions over and over, and it's archived so that people can go click back and see, okay, what's this, whatever. The search function just is so helpful. That's what I wanted to create Wrestling Genius subreddit for, so that people could have a resource to go. You could type something into Google, you don't get the right answer, you go to my subreddit, and there's a conversation about it there, whether it's Inoki and Baba and Ricky Dozan, or if it's Gran Hamada starting Universal, which spawned Michinoku Pro, Osaka Pro, Kaientai Dojo, Torimon, etc. Like those type of questions. That's originally what I wanted to do. I wanted to have these semi-regular segments where people come in and talk about stuff, and it's just a fun place for people to learn things and to discuss wrestling. So that's how that happened.
Well, check it out if you haven't already. Let's keep the story going though, because we know what's coming. Unfortunately, the WWE begins to cut staff. The XFL is canceled, and I'm sure you're sitting at home. You check out the internet and you see a list of names, man. Mike Chioda, Billy Kidman, Mike Rotunda, Fit Finley, Lance Storm, Pat Buck, on and on. A ton of cuts coming that are longtime names. I mean, Kyoto's been there since the freaking 80s. When you see, hey, the world is changing, what are you thinking?
So I told you about the TR app earlier.
Yeah.
They sent out a blast through the TR app And it's like this corporate video, and I just really was befuddled by what was going on. And then obviously you start to find out people lose their jobs. I'm like, well, I had thought, I mean, since, they weren't running shows a lot, they were only, things had scaled way back. I did in the back of my mind think that they were going to make some cuts, especially they just had that Fox deal. Right. So a bunch of talent got bumped way up with their pay.
Well, hang on. How much of that do you think was really Fox and how much of that was AEW?
Oh, I would say it's both of them.
Right.
But Fox was, they had the money because of the Fox deal. I don't know. Again, I'm speaking from something in the office. I'm not in the office. I'm purely speculating. But absolutely, they just have these guys that are getting double what they were on their last contract or whatever, just these crazy amounts. But when you don't have the shows, you don't have the house shows, you don't, you can only use so many people. You would think like, man, they got to cut some people. It had been a couple years since they had done their yearly spring cleaning. So I really thought it was inevitable that some cuts were going to happen. I thought, I wasn't 100% sure, but I thought I was safe because I was in NXT and our deals were less significant than main roster deals. But I also, when you're not working for weeks at a time and you're thinking like, man, I keep getting this paycheck. I'm pretty fortunate that I keep getting a paycheck even though I'm not working. Right. So, and it was in the back of my head that, maybe the axe might fall eventually. So I got my call at the end of the day. So
before you get to the
go ahead.
You get to the call.
Yeah.
Were you shocked when you see, Mike Chioda's another staple here at AdFreeShows.com. But when I saw Fit Finley and Mike Chioda and Billy Kidman and Mike Rotunda, knowing, hey, his kid's like top of the food chain, I thought, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, it's for me, especially Finley and Kidman, because of how instrumental they were backstage and the roles that they had, and who's going to take their role and do it better is in my head is what I'm thinking. Not that anybody of that list is expendable. I just started thinking like, oh man, you expect people to get cut, but there's certain people you just don't expect. And it's funny because there've been a half dozen or so over the last few years with WWE with these longtime 30+ year employees that you're like, man, I can't believe they didn't just, find an office for him somewhere for him to do something, because I mean, they did that for years with a lot of different people. So maybe we're just used to it and we expect it rather than, just the truth, the harsh reality of, moving people on. Finley absolutely surprised me. Kidman absolutely surprised me. Chioda, right? I don't know why you wouldn't even if you're not going to keep him on camera, I don't know why you wouldn't have him be the number one producer of the refs or something. I don't know.
Something. Yeah, it's all weird.
Something. But then I guess I can let you go ahead because I can tell you about my phone call.
Well, yeah, you know where I'm going. I mean,
yeah,
Gallows and Carl Anderson are two guys who we know got the big bump. So did Kurt Hawkins. So did Zack Ryder. EC3's on the list. Leo Rush is on the list. There's a lot of names on here that had recently signed, as you mentioned, deals for, in some cases, double. And now since the world has changed, they're going to adjust their overhead. And unfortunately, you said you get a call at the end of the day too. How does that go?
Once people started getting released, that's when you kind of like the people that I have relationships with, whether it's very close or just acquainted. I was sending out messages, checking in with people, seeing how they are, because it's just such a shitty thing. Right. Yeah. Especially when it comes out of nowhere. And I've been fired before and I've been hurt before. So I know what it feels like to have been through those things. When I say hurt, I mean, there's people that have suffered much worse injuries than I have, but I know how it feels to be on that end of it. So whenever people that I know and have some kind of a close relationship with are going through something like that, I do my best to check in with them and reach out all the time, regardless of how close we are at that moment. So all day long, I'm just texting different people. Hey, dude, just saying, hey, hope you're well. Oh, you're going to kill it. All this, that, whatever. But in the back of my head, I'm kind of like, haven't gotten a call yet. Nobody's told me anything yet. And then I don't know if it was like 5 p.m. or something like that. I get a call from Canyon Seaman, who is our talent relation guy with NXT. And I'm just like, hey, what's going on, Canyon? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, I figured as much. He had expressed to me that there was a future for me in the company as a coach or a producer. And that has been expressed to me for years, to the point where sometimes it's like a backhanded compliment where it's like, oh, one day you're going to be a great coach, as opposed to like, right now you're an awesome talent and one day you're going to be an even better coach, Right. So it's how people perceive you. Man, I had a meeting in the FCW office with Canyon Seaman in 2012, and he told me, hey, I think you may be better suited to be a coach. That was 9 years ago, he told me that. So I got fired up when he told me that then. And I'm just like, yes, I know I'm going to be a good coach, but I'm busy right now. Like I want to work, right? And at NXT, they don't have a situation where you can be a coach and have the benefits of being a coach and the authority and then also have matches. That's just not a thing they do. Like, for instance, Chris Sabin came down to the PC and was a guest coach for a week, and he was awesome. But being there just is like made him, put that fire under him. Like, oh my God, I could kill it with him. I could kill it with him. And he's kind of envisioning that. Whereas they're envisioning like, oh, he can come in and help all our guys get better, but there's no chance for him to have matches and et cetera. That's a weird part of their system that I think needs some work. So anyway, he mentioned to me that there's a future for me. I mean, Hunter said that to me before. Bloom said that to me several times, but I just told Canyon, listen, I appreciate that. And that's awesome. But not until I am done in the ring, because I don't want to be coaching talent and resenting them when they don't live up to my standards, whether it's their attitude or their abilities, because I can't also go and wrestle. Because I can wrestle and coach, I can be that much better of a coach because there's no animosity buildup, right? If I was being forced to quit wrestling, that's where the animosity would come from. But that's not a situation that I wanted to put myself into. And, I could have kept a paycheck and whatever, this whole 10 months or gosh, what do we got? 8.
Right, so they were offering you a coaching position right then.
In not so many words. It wasn't quite, hey, let's switch you over to being a coach right now. But it was like, hey, we'll, basically let us know when you want to be a coach.
Right.
So I could have, said, okay, well, let's get the ball rolling for that. Which I'm sure I could do at any point, but I have decided not to, because I want to wrestle. I've got so much more that I want to do, so much more that I can do. I just am not ready to move past that part of my career.
Meltzer wrote at the time, there were a number of new WWE cuts this past week, perhaps the biggest name being Cassius Ohno. Spradlin, 40, after the news was reported, teased the idea of a retirement, but it was actually the retirement of the name Cassius Ohno and the return of Chris Hero, knockout artist. Given his age and that he wasn't being featured at all on regular NXT television, he was featured on NXT UK, but nobody right now knows the status of that brand. With WWE downsizing, there are questions about a money-losing brand that was originally put into operation to combat the long since defunct ITV world of sports promotion. On the other hand, Chris was something of a player coach who had extensive experience and knowledge, having wrestled nearly every modern style all over the world before returning to WWE. And of course, he goes on from there. What's it like to read about your career in The Observer? That's got to be a little weird, right?
100%, especially when a detail or two is off. But yeah, it was just such a weird time. I didn't tell anybody that I got released right away because, you know, it's an awkward thing. And plus NXT didn't release the names of people that got released. So I thought, okay, well, let me get ahead of this. Let me kind of control
the narrative.
Yeah. Control the narrative, EC3, right? I didn't want a press release. I didn't want to be one name on a list of 10 names. I wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah.
So and then also when you're discussing with people throughout the day, people that have lost their jobs, you don't want to be like, yeah, dude, me too. Like, you know, it's not about you in that moment. Excuse me. So it's just a bit of and I also just quite didn't know how to feel about it. And I'm like, well, what do I do? Whatever. There's a 30-day no compete with NXT contracts. So I got paid for an additional month. Everybody thinks 90 days runs company wide, and that's not true. It's just main roster. So I was, fortunate to have that extra month of pay. That was pretty cool. But I didn't. I don't want to
cut you off, but I do want to mention you had been let go from WWE before.
Yes.
But and we're going to talk about that in the future, I'm sure. But this circumstance, again, I just want to remind everybody, we're right at the start of the pandemic. So in a prior life, when something like this happened, man, your phone's blowing up with every indie promoter internationally and domestically, and you can have a full calendar right away. So yeah, it sucks that maybe your WWE dream is coming to an end, but you can still stay very busy and make a good living, et cetera, et cetera. This is a different situation totally, where nobody knows when they can run shows again, right?
Yeah. First time I got fired, I was booked like 5 days later, and I had like two matches in 3 days or something.
Right.
Because you're like, boom, I'm out here. I'm ready to go. Here it's like,
Yeah.
And the world is uncertain. It's it's not just my profession. It's the world. And it's like, oh man, what am I going to do? So people online, right? They are just so crafty and so like, there's nothing they don't pick up on, right? They just there's somebody out there that knows what's going on, right? So I got, my profile got moved to the alumni section, right? So I started getting tweets, and that started picking up steam. Then I started getting news reporters messaging me. And then I was like, well, that's cool. Thanks.com. I went and I changed my bio to WWE alumni on Twitter and Instagram, and I had a photoshopped my pro wrestling boots, my Cassius Ohno boots, and like the Air Max up tempo style in the corner of a wrestling ring, because it's like, yeah, when you retire, you leave your boots in the ring,
right?
So I posted the boots, and I changed my name to WWE alumni just to try to get people to kind of talk about it for a little bit. Like, oh my God, what's this? What's that? Whatever. And then I had worked with this super talented music video guy, and wanted to have this theme of this is me at NXT. Cool. Oh, I'm getting my ass kicked. Oh, I'm getting my ass kicked. Oh, I'm getting beaten 6 seconds. I'm this, whatever. And my Cassius Ohno song, it goes like slows down. And then my Chris is Awesome song fades in. And then there's me doing elbows and pile drivers and whatever to show, hey, listen, I'm not done. This is the death of Cassius Ohno, the rebirth of Chris Hero. Unfortunately, I don't know when the hell I'm going to wrestle again.
All right.
But so I put that out there to kind of get ahead of it and to try to get some people talking and get some excitement going, because I thought, I'll probably wrestle in the next 6 months. No.
Yeah. Nobody could have predicted that this is where we would still be. When you see yourself in the Observer like this, and he says things like, the issue with him was always his physique. With his height at 6'4" and working ability, the body was the missing ingredient, and it was clear they didn't see him as a television star. in what more and more is a business based on television. And then he continues about how you weren't negative and what maybe your future employment options were with various different companies. But I assume, you being the wrestling genius, you had a pretty good relationship with Dave. Did you talk to Dave before he published this? Do you read it cold for the first time? Do you call him up? What's it like to see about yourself in the Observer like this?
Yeah, once I had decided I was going to post that video and whatever, I did reach out to Dave to kind of give him the story of, there weren't really any details that needed to be expressed, but just that I was indeed one of the people that got let go. There was this is something we can discuss later. There was a situation with my re-signing with WWE where I was very upset with Dave, especially because he and I had become friendly, much friendlier than just being hi and bye.
Right.
That I was really disappointed with something that was reported when it wasn't 100% accurate at that moment. But I'd since gotten over that, and I appreciate Dave greatly, and he's taught me a whole lot about the history of wrestling, and I do enjoy talking wrestling with him. So in this situation, I did reach out to him to give him the heads up that, hey, I'm gone. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not hanging up the boots anytime soon.
So when you get this call, you mentioned you had been talking to your coworkers all day, and you're seeing the bad news about them being let go. Who do you call first? You hang up the phone from talking to Canyon and you say, let me call who?
So it's a bit of a blur, but people I remember having conversations with early on. I don't know if it was that first day. It may have been a couple days later. First couple conversations I remember having were with Lance Storm. He'd been furloughed at that time. TJ Wilson, Tyson Kidd. I had spoken with him and told him my situation. And I think I had spoken with maybe Sanjay. He's a producer. But then and who else is reaching back out to you at that time, so that you can't just go, hey dude, I got fired. Cool. Whatever. It's an awkward situation, especially with the way everything was happening at that time. So I didn't talk to a ton of people that first week or two.
Listen, I don't know how to bring this up, but at the time, I think everybody started to think, well, maybe they just need to right size because of, everything that has changed with the world, and they are losing some house show revenue and blah, blah, blah. But then it comes out WWE is going to have their most profitable year ever. And, business has never been better, especially when it comes to the bottom line. Does that change your opinion about the way they handled talent and releases and all that? I mean, does that affect the way you feel about WWE or management, as it were?
Not greatly. You know what the WWE is, who the WWE are, what their bottom line is. So when it's business over everything, you just grow to expect certain things like that. It was a bit flabbergasting to realize how much they actually made over their projections. But if you sit down and think about it, they cut back all their travel, all their booking.
Overhead's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. They've got this performance center they can use, no problem, right? They've got Full Sail they can use. They eventually moved to Amway. Of course, they're going to make a lot more money, but I guess when you run $1 billion corporation, you have your stockholders and everything. You have everybody to appease, and they just wanted to do something drastic to show, hey, look, we're cutting this and we're doing this and we're getting ahead of it. And you're not a person, you're a number, right? And if you work there and you're thinking you're a person and not a number, there's a bigger chance of you being disappointed, your feelings being hurt, or you being just really angry. So I fortunately never got to the angry point. It's
Right.
it's just funny, right? You just go, oh, of course they made, how many, you look at the billionaires at the start of the pandemic have increased their wealth, right? You could you could, what is it? The homeboy from Amazon could give each of his employees, Jeff Bezos, he could give each of his employees $105,000 and he would still have as much money as he had at the beginning of the pandemic. You're like, oh my God, this is crazy. It's just what happens. It happens in business. And if you fool yourself into thinking it's more personal than it really is, then it will, it'll depress you. It'll piss you off. So fortunately, I never got to a point where I was just seething.
Do you, when you're trying to process all this and wrap your head around it, do you try to call anyone with WWE and say, hey, what could I have done differently? Or do you just sort of figure that out on your own time?
No, I know. I never had any delusions of grandeur there. Like, I didn't think I was higher on the pecking order than I was. I knew that I had a certain level of respect among certain talent, among certain coaches. I knew that I didn't have a certain level of respect from certain talent, from certain coaches. So there wasn't anything where I'm like, oh man, if I would have just done this, I look back to the first time I was fired. You mentioned earlier, the knock on me has always been my physique, and that's true. So there are certain times when I've been in much greater shape. I look back to when I was fired the first time, and I had gotten myself into the best shape I had ever been in. You can look at a match, 2 different matches that I had with Luke Harper, aka Brody Lee, and you can just see, like, if you look at me now and then you look at that, you're like, oh my God, what a different person.
Right.
So I'd worked so hard to get myself into that shape, and I was taken into a room to watch the match back the next day and was told that I was not credible to be standing toe to toe with Luke Harper. And the quote is, if Vince saw that, he'd have a stroke. And I thought, well, what can I do? It's pro wrestling. So much about pro wrestling is whether someone likes you or they don't like you, or someone chooses you or they don't choose you. Right. So when the people in charge have a certain preference, there's not much you can do to get around that. You can try to, push against that and grab the brass ring, as some people say, but if they aren't satisfied, like, what are you going to be more disappointed with yourself? It's a tricky situation that I see. You see these backstage pieces on the network that they do, or you see clips of them on Twitter, if you don't watch the network anymore, of talent that end up depressed. They end up with these stress and anxiety issues. They have bouts of depression because of how they've been used, or how they've been treated, or they felt like, oh man, I just, I don't want to disappoint anybody. That is, to me, that is so silly, because this guy wins the match because that guy said he should win the match, right? This guy said the match was good because he thinks it was good. This guy said the match was bad because he thinks it was bad. You can't tie yourself to those thoughts, because you'll just end up doing more damage to yourself. I feel terrible for talent that feels depressed because they didn't have a good performance, or maybe they had a great performance, but someone just didn't like it. There's that Kevin Owens situation where he comes back in Gorilla and he goes up to Vince, and Vince is like, that was awful. Right.
Right.
How crushing. That sucks. And we know how good Kevin Owens is, and we know how talented he is. I'm sure he's had some bad matches, but there is no point when he should sit down and have to think, God, I should really rethink my career because I'm not doing it. I feel bad when those things happen. And yes, I have had issues with my weight my entire career. I've had it since I started lifting weights in high school, and I've had my own personal issues with it, and I've had other people's issues with my look or physique or whatever. And it's not something that I need to be sad or be depressed about, because it's, life is too short, right? I'm getting a little philosophical here, and I didn't mean to do this, but life is too short to let these things really tear you down. Because if I don't have the physique of say, how about this? How about being me and teaming with Cesaro for all those years, who's
Right.
the mecca of manhood, right?
Right. Yeah.
If I don't look like Cesaro, does that mean I'm not as good of a wrestler as I am, or I don't know the holds that I know, or the wrestling history that I know? You have to put value in other things than other people's opinion of you, even if it is the company. If you aren't willing to do what they want you to do, then you have to be at peace with it. And I'm at peace with it. There are things that I would like to do with the rest of my life, the rest of my career, but those are my thoughts and my opinions. It's just, that's how I'm going to wrap that up.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the future. I do want to ask, I know we're starting to wind things down here, but a lot of times you hear guys when they leave the company, they say, "Oh, I don't watch anymore." And some are telling the truth, some maybe aren't. But I get the impression sometimes that it's not always necessarily that they're pissed off or they're mad. It's just like, I'm fucking exhausted with this and I need a break. They're still wrestling fans. They love it. But they just have a sour taste in their mouth when all of this happens, but you're in the middle of a pandemic. It feels like that's probably a little harder than normal because, your options of what you can do to distract yourself are a little different. Did you continue to watch or not so much?
WWE, no. WWE, NXT UK. I haven't watched any of that on, since I've been let go. I think the only thing I tuned in, and you're going to laugh, is I think Retribution's first match. I was like, oh, what the hell? I was home. I flipped it on and watched a little bit of that. But there's so much other wrestling that you can enjoy and watch. And I love it all. Right. So I have watched, there was a couple weeks where I watched nothing but Manami Toyota, and she may be the best in-ring performer of all time. She's incredible. I have my yearbooks that I mentioned where you're going through 1990, 1991, and you're watching all these promotions. When Tracy passed away, I have 26 discs on his career from 1986 on that I just dove into and watched as much of that as I could. Just last night, I was watching a Terry Funk and Dory Funk tag match from 1970 in Japan. There's just so much to watch and enjoy that I couldn't shut it out completely. There were a couple weeks this summer with a couple hard deaths and speaking out that I just could not. I couldn't watch any wrestling. I just had to remove myself at that moment. But a couple weeks later, I started watching these matches with the current Kikutaro, when he was Ebasan in Osaka Pro and his rival, this Kushimbo Kamen, and they just had these brilliant comedy matches. I think Kikutaro is the greatest comedy wrestler of all time. And just Rachel and I would sit in there and we'd watch them one after the other, and just would bring you so much joy. Kikutaro is like a master impressionist, and he would get his mask made up to look like Bret Hart, and he would go out and he would do all of Bret's stuff. He would come out as Ebba Stan Hansen, and I actually have the mask of him dressed up as Stan Hansen coming in with the trunks and doing everything. So there's always something in pro wrestling that I can find and enjoy, whether it's something I've already seen or something I'm discovering for the first time. I don't fault people that need to get away from it, though, because it's tenuous, especially new people at the Performance Center. It's such a difficult process to dump 50 years of pro wrestling history on a brand new brain, right? That all they know is John Cena and The Rock.
Right.
And you're like, you haven't seen Nick Bockwinkel versus Rick Martel? Like, oh, you're never going to make it in wrestling. Or, oh, you don't know who Marty Jannetty is? You're just talking to Shawn Michaels? You know, so you can have that attitude towards people, or you can try to make a connection with them and try to find someone that they can watch and enjoy. Right? You can go, there's an amateur guy. Oh, well, you know, you came from amateur. You should watch a little bit of Chad Gable because he's a guy that made the transition. Don't watch Kurt Angle yet because you're not Kurt Angle, right? You can't wrestle like somebody that's super over when you start out because you're not super over, right? Watch, that's indirectly knocking Chad Gable, and that's not what I'm doing. I'm just explaining the difference between the two. You find somebody and you're like, watch these Molly Holly matches. They're 5 or 6 minutes. They're easy to digest. They're not what people are doing now, but it's real basic and real easy, etc. You have to spoon feed them, because if you try to just throw too much on them, they just will, the second they walk out that door at the Performance Center, they're not going to think about wrestling for a second. Right. You want them to message you on the weekend and go, oh my God, I just saw Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect. Holy shit, that was awesome. You want that. You don't want, hey, why didn't you watch that? Why didn't you watch all the Steamboat Flair matches this weekend? You know, it's a very fine line between cultivating and then just overwhelming. Right. So I don't blame, roundabout way, I don't blame people that need to unplug. But to be successful in pro wrestling and continually successful, I think you need to understand the product. I think you need to understand the history, and then you just need to know where you can fit in or fit out.
Well, what I wanted to fit in was a question about cinematic matches. Of course, the graveyard match with AJ Styles and Undertaker happened at WrestleMania, and a lot of people thought it was the best match on the card. Certainly it was Undertaker's last match. AEW would try to do something similar with their Stadium Stampede match. This is in a time when you couldn't have fans at all, so we had to do something different, and they tried something different, and I think they had some successes. But I'm curious what you, as an old school wrestling fan who has certainly done a lot of new school stuff, thought about them trying to make some chicken salad here.
So I don't mind them. I think they can be done well, but they absolutely should not be overdone, and they need to be heavily produced. You know, I don't like wrestling that is heavily produced, but in these situations, you have to be so careful about the tone of what you're presenting. And if things are too hokey or too, like, comedy is very difficult, right? Comedy is so hard in pro wrestling because, one, we're never as funny as we think we are, right? We come up with something, we're like, oh my God, that's great, whatever. And then you throw it out to an audience and they're like, haha, it's tough. It's really an art, and it's an underappreciated art.
Right.
So if you're having some type of a serious match and then you interject some sort of comedy, even if it is a home run, you change the emotion of the person watching it. And then it's hard to flip switches back and forth. The really good ones can do it. I talked about Terry Funk earlier. Terry could have you just completely enthralled, and then he could be screaming and whining, and you're like, oh, that's kind of funny. Like, okay. And then you're like, oh my God, I think Lawler's trying to take his eye out. Right. And it snaps you back. Not everybody can do that. So with cinematic matches, it needs to be a group effort. Everybody's got to be on the same page, and it's got to be produced in a way that gets the most out of what you're doing. And I think if you only do them couple times a year at most, you can give it the attention it deserves, and it can be something different. I do like things that are different, but sometimes you're getting into something and then there's a weird camera angle and it just comes across as hokey, and you're like, I don't know, that takes me out of it. And you need to have enough people putting this thing together that can spot that, because 4 out of 5 people might think it's awesome, but if that 5th person starts a dialogue about, hey, how can we make this part how can we smooth this out a little bit, so some things are meant to be silly, some things are not. You just have to be careful.
Well, we hope you guys were entertained here today and we didn't take you out of it, as we had our very first episode of Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling? We're going to be back next week with a very special tribute episode all about the late, great Tracy Smothers. As you heard, Chris has been watching his entire career from like 1986 on. So we've got a lot to talk about Tracy. We want to do him justice, and we're going to do our best next week. But right now, we've got a very special segment. We're liking the name Words of Wisdom. Maybe we'll work on that in the future, but you want to drop a little knowledge to some younger wrestlers who may be listening to this.
Yeah. So the name of the podcast is Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling? Right. And it's a pun on the name Hero, of course, but it's also, when I think of saving wrestling, I think of saving the history of wrestling and passing it on, and saving the integrity of wrestling, not to get too into it. But weekly, whenever we do an episode of these, I would like to just leave the young up and coming wrestlers with just a little, some words of wisdom. And the first one on this, I think, is very important. You hear this all the time in wrestling, right? I'm sure you've heard this, Conrad. Have you heard the term less is more?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, well, I'm here to tell you that that's bullshit. So I understand the sentiment behind the message, right? But what I think happens is it comes across to younger talent as, you're doing too much, stop doing so damn much, right? And I can look into the history of wrestling, and every generation thought the generation after them was doing too much, doing too fast, doing whatever, right? I think that puts people off. You can find this article, this segment that Carl Gotch wrote up about how wrestling is terrible, and the example he used was Harley Race, right? Who would ever think that Harley Race was in there being a spot guy or whatever? So I think less is more just delivers the wrong message. And the message I would like to deliver is to get more out of less. And it's saying the same thing in a different way. Yeah. So instead of telling a person, hey, don't do so much shit, the stuff that you do, get the absolute most out of it. Place it in a spot in your match where it can resonate the most with the audience, with the commentators, with whatever. So instead of going out there with the idea to do 10 crazy things, pick your 5 things that you want to do and build around them and make more out of them. And then, you can always build off of what you've done. You don't have to do everything that your very first match. You can just kind of slowly build on it over time. It's trial and error. So that's something I always like to tell people, just get more out of less. How can we get more out of less?
Well, let's see if we could get a little more music knowledge too. Wrestling fans who have followed your career know that you're also a big hip hop head, for lack of a better word. But let's drop a little knowledge on some music, if you will.
So I love hip hop. I love a lot of different types of music, but hip hop is what's always resonated with me the most since I've been young. And I would like to give a recommendation every episode, whether it is a song, whether it's an artist, whether it's an album. And I think, what better way to start than with a rapper out of New Jersey named Vyro the Virus. Vyro passed away almost 10 years ago now, but I had the privilege to have a song that was recorded and performed by Vyro the Virus. Chris is awesome, right? I went to a Genius show in Philly, the Jizza from the Wu-Tang Clan. I saw him at the Truck. He performed his album Liquid Swords in entirety, and that's what I was there for. But I saw this guy beforehand. He was rapping. His voice was clear. Usually at a lot of these shows, you can't understand what everybody's saying, but I could hear his punchlines, his delivery. I went and talked to him at the merch table. which is funny when you're a wrestler going to a music show to go to the merch table. It's just kind of like a funny trading of roles. And I talked to him. He said he loved Dusty Rhodes and he remembered Nikita Koloff. He grew up watching NWA stuff, and he and I started a loose friendship. And we became MySpace friends. That's how long ago this was. And I was on a tour of Noah, and I was actually staying in the dojo at the time, and I kept listening to his music over and over. And I just thought, man, this guy is awesome. Let me propose that he write a song for me. So he came up with my song, Chris is Awesome. And oh man, what a song. It's such a banger still to this day. I love it. People come up to me all the time with it. So people are familiar with Viro because of that song. Those of you that don't know about the rest of his work, I want to introduce you to a song of his called Starlight, produced by the Snow Goons out of Europe. Starlight is just the melody is great. His lyrics are wonderful. It's very much about the plight of a starving artist, and it's something going throughout wrestling I've really connected to a lot. And it's just such a wonderful song. He was such a great guy. Really sad to no longer have him around, but I feel very fortunate that I was able to just work with him, to meet him, and then just, that Chris is Awesome song is just, it's around forever. And I feel very fortunate.